Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Reactions and First Look podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Easy for me to say. It is championship week. It is upon us, finally, Nick, and I'm excited about it. Got some irons in the fire. How are your various fantasy leagues doing? What are your playoffs looking like?
Yeah, still hanging around in a couple leagues, but these last 2 weeks have not been kind to me.
Oh, no.
I had a lot of Drake London, and even though he came back this past week, obviously didn't do a whole lot. Had a few teams where I had London and Marvin Harrison, and that combination kind of did me in down the stretch. Was depending a little bit too heavily on Emeka Ibuka, a little bit too heavily on Rashee Rice, and even Jahmyr Gibbs. Over these last couple of weeks, was able to get it going. As a pass catcher a bit in that Pittsburgh game. I thought that would be a much bigger spot for Jahmyr Gibbs. It was not. So coming off of a really, really nice 2024 fantasy season, this one not looking like it's going to be quite as fruitful.
Yeah, Gibbs in the fantasy playoffs has been one of those stories. He's like the reverse Trevor Lawrence, where Lawrence, if you had him for 2 weeks in a row, he kind of carried you through. I'm just looking at the RotoWire Dynasty League page where you actually scored well and lost. Can't defend the crown this year. But yeah, hey, sometimes that happens, and it's really frustrating to watch there. So yeah, I do have some irons in the fire. My original league, Amaki, I'm in the championship game despite losing Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. I'm going to be scrambling for this upcoming week. I've got some NFFC possibilities still going on there. A couple other finals, so we'll see. We got some stuff to root for this week, and that's all I care about. It, want to have some skin in the game in championship week. Let's jump right into it because there's a lot of big things that happen. The best Thursday night game of the year by far, Rams Seahawks, was a fun game. That's one I stayed up to do the rewatch on Thursday night, like 1 a.m. in Wichita, Kansas there, just because, just got in town, see my dad. Didn't have Amazon right away in the hotel, so I streamed on NFL.com afterward there, and wow, what a fun game to watch.
Yeah, a game that felt like it had to be the game of the year, going into the rest of week 16. And then we were presented with, a few more candidates over the course of the weekend. I think coming out of this, obviously a huge win for Seattle, come from behind, down 16 late in the game, all that kind of spurred on by the punt return from Rashid Shaheed. This game was kind of like more of like a high octane version of the first matchup, where we had more turnovers on the Seattle side, did get 2 more interceptions out of Sam Darnold. There was certainly a time where it felt as though Seattle was not only going to lose this game, but, reputationally was taking a big hit, looking ahead to the playoffs of, man, all right, Sam Darnold has now thrown 6 interceptions in 2 games against the Rams. Are we really going to trust this guy heading into the postseason? And then you get the Rashid Shaheed touchdown, the quick score on 2 plays, the following drive, you get the 2-point conversions. All of a sudden it's 30-30. And, the Seattle defense, which really had a rough night overall, gave up a ton of yards to the Rams, almost 600 yards of offense for LA. And so much of that was Puka Nacua repeatedly getting loose down the field. But to see the Rams put up that kind of yardage total without Devontae Adams and with Colby Parkinson giving them nothing was kind of wild. But Seattle buckled down when it needed to. I mean, the Rams were up 30-14, finished out their final drives being 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, missed a field goal, which was big, and then punted again at the end of regulation before putting that touchdown on the board on the first drive of overtime. So that's the thing with the Rams, Jeff. Like, to me, they are still the most complete team in the NFC, the most complete team in the NFL. But we do see stretches every now and then where that offense does get bogged down.
Yeah, they do. And this was a super tilting game for me, fantasy-wise. I have Kyren Williams in a couple of key spots. That was frustrating. Corum comes in, gets the 1-yard touchdown run. Corum barely got in on that one. Struggled on he got the first, the red zone carries on the first drive as well. And I'm like, Kyron's good at that. He's better than the one spot where Kyren Williams is better than Blake Corum is in the red zone. And yet he doesn't get those carries in that one there. Yeah. And of course, as been documented, I have no Puka. I got Puka in a couple of leagues. I got the Stafford Puka against me combo in one league. That was fun. Really tough there. JSN, for a shootout game that it was, he was okay, but you were expecting more. Instead, it was a Kenneth Walker show. Let me ask you this. How much can you count on Kenneth Walker this week at Carolina? He was huge this past week against the Rams after being invisible the 2 previous weeks.
I would not count on that kind of performance again. It was uncharacteristic from Walker. It was uncharacteristic from the Seattle offense, from the Rams defense to allow those big plays, and the vast majority of his production came on, the 55-yarder and then had a long catch and run early in the game as well, which it all counts the same. You're going to have plays every now and then. That's just not really what we've seen from Seattle. Like the numbers look like, oh, they ran all over the Rams in this game. Kenneth Walker did get, just about over 9 yards per carry. But again, 55 of his 100 yards came on one carry. So maybe this is Seattle discovering something in that running game. I'm inclined to trust the larger sample here, which says Seattle's been a bottom 5 running team in terms of EPA this season. But, the Carolina defense, I think, is still pretty gettable. They're about middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs over the last month. They are bottom 5, though, in yards per carry. So we'll see if they can get it going. I mean, Carolina's strength to be defensively all season has been the play of those corners, right? Coming up with another big play at the end to seal up that win against Tampa Bay. And I think it's a favorable matchup in some ways for those defensive backs for Carolina, where you have one guy that you really, really need to key on. If they're able to kind of, between Mike Jackson and JC Horn, I wouldn't say shut down JSN because that's only happened one time this year. But if you could contain Jackson Smith and Jigba, I feel like you feel pretty good about your chances to make Sam Darnold try to win this game with, Cooper Kupp and Rashid Shaheed, who did not have a catch, by the way, on Thursday night.
No, and went from 7 targets 1 week before to invisible that offensively. Otherwise, there had one run. That's about it. I'm going to, we're talking about them playing Carolina. This is a good time to talk about Carolina and Tampa Bay. We need to have a Baker Mayfield conversation.
Yeah. We do. He's bad.
Really awful.
He's been bad for a while now. He went from potential MVP not that long ago to, in my opinion, a guy who's playing like a bottom 10, bottom 15, back half of the league quarterback for 2 months now. Tampa Bay is just a train wreck, a total train wreck. I think Baker looks, lost. He looks panicked in the pocket. The escapability that really defines Baker Mayfield and made him, the dark horse MVP that he was earlier in the season just does not seem to be there. Like he's not breaking that last tackle that he was always somehow getting away from. The Bucs actually came out and scored a touchdown on their first drive. They got a field goal on their second drive. The offense was looking good. Both of those were long, sustained drives where they're picking up first downs. And then after that, there was like a 2-quarter drought where they just did nothing offensively. But for the third straight week, Jeff, and it's tough to live like this in the NFL, but the third straight week, the Buccaneers had the ball with ample time to go down and either tie or win a game and couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They picked up a big third down. Baker made a great throw down the field, and then just kind of a miscommunication with Mike Evans on the game-losing play. And it's just, those are the things that were going the Buccaneers' direction. It felt like early in the season, and now it's every single week they have these opportunities and they can't capitalize. On top of that, the defense is just as bad as the numbers say it is. I mean, giving up a 34-yarder on a 3rd and 4, Carolina's deep in their own territory to Jalen Coker. That's really what won the game for Carolina. I thought this was a buyback spot on Tampa Bay. I have no faith in this offense. This looks like a rudderless team and a team that needs some sort of catalyst for change. It's a little Ravens like to me.
I like that comp. I really like that comp a lot. I think there's some, and if you somehow made it to the fantasy finals despite having a Buka or a Bucky Irving, let alone Baker. I mean, they get Miami this week at Miami. That should be a good spot. They are favored by 5.5 points. I'll take Miami in the points on that one if we're talking for staff picks. But even as dreadful as Miami looked this past week, I think that was just like the first week 1 of Quinn Ewers. I think week 2 might be a smidgen better, but I don't trust Tampa Bay. I don't trust any of their players right now. I may have to play Emeka Egbuka in one league, but I'm not going to be happy about it. It's just, I don't want to have to play Baker. I have a friend that started Baker over Matthew Stafford in the NFFC RotoWire Online Championship. He's got a live team too for an overall prize on that one there. And that's the gift that we'll keep on not giving there as far as that goes. Let's talk about the huge impactful game on Saturday night, Packers-Bears. What did I just watch there in that end of that game? Because that was just bonkers how the momentum just completely turned. 16-6 in the fourth quarter. That game was done. It was over. It was cooked. They get the onside kick, though, after the field goal. They're even lucky to kind of get the field goal on that one there. They do that. All of a sudden, the momentum completely changes in that game. Packers still drive down and then have the fumble in overtime. Bears with amazing dime of a throw and incredible catch by DJ Moore to finish this game, all of which worked perfectly for my fantasy interests. But that's besides that point. This game should have ended a different way, despite so many things going right for the Bears.
Yeah, this is one of many, like, only the Packers find a way to lose this game type of losses. And, I think a lot of fan bases feel that way. I saw a lot of that after the Detroit game on Sunday. Like, only the Lions could find a way to lose like this.
You and I can raise our hands with that.
Yeah,
too,
right.
right.
It's like, I think every fan base has a list of memories like this. But, I mean, this is about as bad as it gets for a regular season loss. I don't think we can quite put this in the pantheon with the, myriad other playoff losses that the Packers have suffered over the last decade. But this was eerily similar to the Seattle game in a lot of ways, kind of a slog offensively, but you feel like you have it wrapped up. And then it really just comes down to not falling on an onside kick. That falls right on Romeo Doubs. It's not Rich Bisaccia, the special teams guy.
Right.
Doubs was right there. That's supposed to be the guy with the best hands on the team. I don't know how you muff that. And of course, you knew Chicago was going down and scoring afterward. There was no doubt. Even when it came down to fourth down and, Keyshawn Nixon was given an opportunity to blow a coverage, which of course he took. He's been the worst cornerback in the NFL for the last 2 weeks. I don't think there's any debate there. But yeah, you could go through. I mean, the face mask on 3rd and 20, that extended a Bears drive where they got the field goal, the Jacobs fumble at the 3-yard line. I mean, the Packers were awful in the red zone the entire game, even with Jordan Love, who of course went out before half. I do think Malik Willis played like an A+ game once again. Every time he's played for the Packers,
good.
He's been fantastic. The fumbled snap in overtime was awful. I don't know if that's on him. I don't know if that's on, the center. Willis said he was trying to speed up the count because they were up against the play clock. Just can't happen. I mean, that's a very gameable 4th and 1. And at the very least, you're taking more time off. You're working it into field goal range. And then the game, of course, ended very similarly to that Seattle loss, on a bomb down the field on a great throw from Caleb Williams. But Green Bay got a gift from Aaron Rodgers on Sunday. All of a sudden, the pressure to win out is kind of off of this team, which is huge because we have no idea who the quarterback is going to be this weekend against Baltimore. We also don't know who the quarterback's going to be for the Ravens, which is a common theme in week 17.
Oh, there's so many of those. Like some real quarterbacks, some bad quarterbacks, like Minnesota, like doesn't matter. It's like which bad quarterback is going to start, but that still matters too, because we
got Brosmer out there from Minnesota. That's official now.
Is that official? Yep. Okay.
Hairline fracture for McCarthy.
I have Jefferson in a final somehow. I don't know how.
You might be the only person in the world with that.
I know, right? Screenshot that stuff. It's just like when we were asking for proof of concept of Ashton Jeanty making it to the semifinals last week. Congratulations, by the way, because yes, you probably advanced. But question on there. I'm gonna, but I'll do we'll do some other questions later. Just one question here really jumped out. We'll talk more Jacksonville in a second, but someone has Master J has Dak and Brissett. Trevor Lawrence is on waivers. Should I attempt to go grab him? I say if you've got the drop, yes, block your opponent. Grab them anyhow. Even if and then we can worry about the start in a second here, but just grab them. Don't let somebody else start them against you.
Yeah, I think you take a look at who they have. Maybe they have, I don't know, Matthew Stafford or Josh Allen or one of these guys you're definitely starting this week, and it becomes moot. But yeah, I think that's a good point. When you're down to just one other team that's actively making claims, you can do a little looking. Maybe they had Lamar. Unlikely that they made the final if they have Lamar, but they could be in a situation where they need that player. So I think that is kind of it's a little gamesmanship more than anything else. You're not going to start 3 quarterbacks, but play a little keep away this time of year. As far as Lawrence versus Dak, and what was the other matchup?
Jacoby Brissett against the Bengals. I mean, they're all 3 are good matchups.
Yeah.
Dak against the Commanders. I mean, yeah, all 3 are good matchups. They'll be in my top 10.
Right. Yeah. The problem with rostering all 3 is then you have 3 choices where you feel like you're going to make the wrong call no matter what. I mean, Dak against the Commanders is an excellent matchup. Lawrence against the Colts, that defense looked horrendous last night against San Francisco, specifically the pass defense. So, I mean, that looks like a great matchup. Lawrence is playing the best football of his career right now.
Yes.
And then, Brissett didn't throw the ball 40 times this past week, partially because they just didn't have the ball enough, but he gets the Cincinnati Bengals, So I think all 3 of those are extremely viable. I probably lean toward Dak, I guess. He to me seems like, you're shooting for upside in a fantasy final. I think, that pairing of wide receivers going up against the Commanders defense, to me, that's probably your best scenario. You're hoping, in that instance, the Dallas defense shows up and Washington is able to score. I worry about that a little bit with Josh Johnson potentially being out there. All three again are really excellent options. From a game competitiveness standpoint, like all these games are lined about the same, right? The Cowboys are 7-point favorites, Bengals are 7-point favorites, and then Jacksonville's about a 7-point favorite. Which one do you think game script wise, maybe builds you in the highest floor?
I think Lawrence.
Okay.
Because, well, it's either Lawrence or it's Brissett. Game script wise, I worry about the Cowboys just not caring or running away and hiding. Either way, I think is kind of, if they do care, they could run away and hide. And it could be like they just run against them, against the Commanders. Commanders kind of played their Super Bowl part 2. They had the Sunday night game, and remember, they flopped the following week. I think, Saturday against the Eagles, they gave their very best. And then then Mariota got hurt, and then it was all over after that point. Now, this game, I mean, it is the Cowboys coming to town, though, too. I mean, they do hate the Cowboys. I don't know. Lawrence has a lot to play for. They're indoors. Remember that. So elements won't be an issue on that one right there. I like it. I like indoors in late December. So I haven't, with the caveat that I haven't done my rankings, I might put Lawrence at the top of those three. So
it's fair. It's totally fair. It's not something that we would have said, even 3 weeks ago, but he is playing at that level. The Jags are also throwing the ball a ton. They're not running the ball all that effectively. They actually ran it horribly this past week. It didn't have a ton of success against the Jets either. ETN had that big game through the air. They had I think it was 8% or plus 8% pass rate over expected in the Denver game. And again, the Colts did okay on the ground, last night against McCaffrey, but the secondary is what you're worried about right now if you're Indy. And I think it's justifiable to start Lawrence here and ride the hot hand.
Yeah. Sometimes some quarterbacks are your playoff hero, and Lawrence is kind of fitting that genre there, and maybe takes it into the playoffs there as well. God, I can't wait for the AFC playoffs. I think they're going to be just awesome to see. There's so many good competitive matchups there. I'm really looking forward to it there. Speaking of the playoffs, Playoff Blitz is one of our advertisers. They have a fun game you can play to get into the once the playoffs start. Check this out. If you're like us, you hate when the fantasy season ends, when real football gets good, you got to try out playoffblitz.com. It's fantasy football built for the NFL playoffs. No draft, no waivers, no sweat. Members just pick a lineup each week from the playoff teams. You can use each player only once. So once you start a player, you lose him. That's where the strategy kicks in. When do you use Josh Allen? When do you use Trevor Lawrence? Remember, no need to hold a draft. Just create a league and invite your friends. Starting a league is super easy. It takes less than a minute, and you're all in from wildcard weekend to the Super Bowl. PlayoffBlitz.com is your home for playoff fantasy football. Leagues are $79, and you can invite as many people as you like. Run an office pool, invite league mates from your regular season leagues, or even your grandma's bingo league. Join today at PlayoffBlitz.com, where fantasy football meets the Super Bowl. Enter promo code ROTOWIRE for a discount on your league today. Thanks to Playoff Blitz for their sponsorship. Nick, a couple of other big games. Steelers upset the Lions. Wacko finish in this one here. The Lions can't come back. The Steelers hold the ball for almost all of the third quarter in this game. Kenneth Gainwell makes one of the best catches you'll ever see until you watch like the next game. I swear we see one insane play game after game from someone. The level of talent is amazing, but Gainwell's catch and the wherewithal to get up and score the touchdown. How crazy was that?
It was a huge inflection point in this game. Detroit was up 10-3 at that point. There was some kind of timeout shenanigans toward the end of the second quarter. And, Pittsburgh ended up being able to get that play off, able to punch it in. Incredible, ridiculous catch by Gainwell. Kind of reminded me of the he did what Antonio Freeman play back in the day, where it just, watching that in real time, like there was no possible way that ball did not hit the ground. And then you saw one replay and that's all you needed to see. I think this is the most impressive win of the season for Pittsburgh. An ultra depressing loss for Detroit at home. I mean, they have been so good off of losses this season. They've generally been so good at home during the Goff and Campbell era, and their inability to run the ball, getting away from it as early as they did too. I know they have injuries all over the offensive line, but we have seen plenty of teams run it effectively to extremely effectively on the Steelers defense this season. 11 combined carries for David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And 5 of those, I believe, came on the first 2 drives of the game. So the Lions just basically went pass every single time the rest of the game. It had enough success with it to hang in there, to almost come back and win this game on the final drive. Chris Boswell left the door open missing, I believe it was a sub 40-yard field goal, which you almost never see
Right.
from Boswell. And then, of course, we get maybe the craziest finish of the year. But fantasy-wise, this game, it did not play out like I thought it would whatsoever. You got a really rough game from Jahmyr Gibbs on the ground. He did bail you out with 10 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown. So at least it wasn't a total disaster. You got nothing from Montgomery. Goff ended up being fine with the high yardage total and the 3 touchdowns. And then on the Pittsburgh side of things, you get 2 long touchdown runs, twin 45-yarders from Jaylen Warren, and Kenneth Gainwell ended up as the leading receiver for the Steelers team, 5 for 78 and that touchdown. The leading actual receiver, Adam Thielen, 4 for 49.
And that's a relevant point because DK Metcalf will almost certainly not be available for this game and might not be available for week 18 against the Ravens. Suspended 2 games pending appeal, which I believe that is happening almost as we speak right now on Tuesday afternoon. We'll see when we get a result on that. I haven't seen that since the end of the Sirius XM show half an hour ago. But it's definitely a weird thing going on for them. Question from Scott Kobe asking about the Detroit Lions. Can you trust any of these Lions on the road against the Vikings this upcoming week? We already talked about the Vikings not having Max Prosmer. Gibbs, the Lions are running up against this Vikings defense, which is on fire right now. Yeah. I don't see how you can bench Gibbs or Amon-Ra, but what about Jamison Williams?
Yeah, I mean, I actually worry more about the Lions running game again this week than I do the passing game, because I think we could see something similar unfold. Like if you're not able to run it on Pittsburgh and you still have all these injuries on the offensive line, are you really going to be able to do that against Minnesota? The nice thing with Gibbs is if they can't run him, he'll be heavily involved in the passing game. So he's still got to be out there. I mean, Jamison Williams is still going to be very hit or miss. He was the Lions leading receiver on Sunday, but still had kind of a down fantasy game because he didn't find the end zone. But I think this has to end up being probably another high volume passing game for Detroit. I don't know if we're getting 54 attempts out of Jared Goff, but probably 40 plus. So I think you still got to roll your Lions out there. And then on the other side of this, of course, it's Max Prosmer for Minnesota. Did just enough in that second half, despite a fumble return for a touchdown to hang on against the Giants. That's also maybe the deadest team in the NFL right now. The Giants have just given up offensively. They ran the ball in their first 17 plays of that game. Like they're just not trying anything. They don't want to expose Jackson Dart. And you have a Lions team that will be playing in a true desperation situation. So, the nice thing about that is Detroit plays on Christmas Day. So their results, will not be dependent on the Packers. Like they just have to play this game to win. They'll be super aggressive. There's no worry of, we're eliminated because Green Bay won. So I still think you got to gas up the Detroit Lions this week. I don't feel great about it with those injuries on the offensive line, but there will be enough volume to go around to me in the passing game.
Yeah. My initial reaction is I can't believe the Lions are a 6-point favorite. Then I looked at the quarterback news there. And yeah. You understand exactly why there. Anyways, one last Lions question. Jahmyr Gibbs. We were talking 2 weeks ago about him being the number 1 overall next year. How do you feel about that now?
I still think he's in that conversation for sure. If you just look at fantasy point leaders this season, Christian McCaffrey is easily number 1 among running backs, about 3 fantasy points more per game than Gibbs. But obviously McCaffrey comes with his warts in terms of his age, in terms of the injury history. Has not been efficient at all really this year on the ground. It's just been, a ton of volume and the pass catching. I still think Gibbs is absolutely in that conversation. It's not a definitive 1-1 to me. It's McCaffrey, it's Gibbs, it's probably Jonathan Taylor, depending on the quarterback situation. I think Bijan is still in that category. Achane has kind of been right there with that group in terms of production, but I think we view him a little bit differently. We'll see what the Dolphins do this offseason. And then, in terms of receivers, Nakua, JSN, Jamar Chase. I think Chase is probably still in that conversation.
I was going to suggest Puka, but I think Chase is still in that conversation. I think I agree. I think that's the thing. There's we just mentioned 8 people. I think it's going to be a fun draft next year. Now we got 2 more weeks of information, of news, 2 more weeks of results, an off season where teams adjust their rosters. But I'm looking forward to 2026 drafts because there is no clear number 1 right now. I love that. I think that should be fun.
Yeah, as usual, there's going to be a ton of depth. There are not going to be very many players in the first 2 rounds even that you view as like a total landmine type of pick. Things will emerge by the time we are talking about this in May and in June, and we'll have our favorites. But I think it's kind of more fun when there's not an obvious, all right, these are the top three, these are the next three. It's going to be justifiable, I think, to order players in kind of your own personal preference. The Derrick Henry question, I think, is going to be interesting because there will still be Derrick Henry believers. There will still be Ravens believers. Things will change this offseason for Baltimore. The fantasy production hasn't even been that bad for Derrick Henry. The usage has been very questionable. That was again the case on Sunday night when he's off the field and like the gotta have it drive of the year for Baltimore. He's going to be back with the Ravens next year, but I think there will be plenty of drafts where you're getting what I think could be an appealing discount on Derrick Henry.
Yeah. I think so. Definitely not first round guy for me, just because I don't think you can trust the usage and age and all that. He does have a fumbling problem this year, and that is concerning to me. And maybe that's why we have to put the APB out on him for just disappearing at the end of the game, not even being on the field. Just insane. Just an insane finish to that there. So Baltimore, I mean, now they're facing Green Bay with their playoff lives just hanging by a tiny little thread. They have to win out, and the Steelers have to lose out. So it's an odd spot to be in. You and I kind of expressed some Ravens fatigue, like this current version. I mean, they just never clicked this year. Never really had.
No,
they had maybe halves of games where they looked like the Ravens that we expected, but it'd be like the Cincinnati game. Okay, the defense stepped up and shut the Bengals out, but the offense was efficient in that game, but it wasn't like a dominant. Lamar got sacked 4 times in that game.
Right.
And I don't know what to do with Lamar next year. I don't know, because he has not looked like Lamar since like week 3, and so that's going to be really a tricky question going forward with them. Do they hold on to John Harbaugh? Does Monken stick around? Monken was considered like a genius going into this year, and now people are calling for his head.
I mean, they had the huge game in week 1, and that was, to me, kind of the only time that they've really looked like the Ravens that we're used to. I think they're a deserved team to miss the playoffs. I know they've had the Lamar injury that kind of hangs over the season and gives you an easy out, but they've also had ample opportunity to play their way back into the field. The Steelers were leaving the door open, and Baltimore just refused to take it. So I don't think they deserve to be in. I mean, it's a huge missed opportunity with the way that we're looking at the AFC shaping up. Like if you put last year's Ravens in this year's playoff field, I think they are easily the favorites to come out. Easily, right? Like there's always going to be Buffalo. You worry about Josh Allen, just best player on the field. I get that. But last year's Ravens would be far and away the best team in this year's AFC playoff picture. And to not have to worry about Burrow, to not have to worry about Mahomes, you have a very flawed Buffalo Bills team. The Patriots seem like, is it too soon for them to make a run? Denver has flaws. Jacksonville has flaws. Like this would be the year. This would be the year, I think, for Baltimore to make that run and to not even have a chance, not even a puncher's chance, to find your way in. I think it's going to be really difficult to accept. Ravens are not eliminated. We should clarify that, but that can happen on Saturday against the Green Bay Packers. And that game matters for Steelers purposes too, because if Green Bay wins at Lambeau Field on Saturday night, that Steelers-Browns game becomes meaningless for Pittsburgh.
Yes, it does. So, getting healthy is super important for that team too. And then week 18 will mean nothing. That the Ravens Steelers game could mean absolutely nothing, which is just kind of crazy to think about there. Absolutely some wild stuff there. You mentioned the Bills, the flawed Bills team. They won, but barely. They hung on against the Browns. They really did hang on. And I think it was mentioned in the comments and during our live stream here by Uncle Ted, they kind of stopped giving James Cook the ball, which is just bizarre because he was awesome again in the first half, 2 touchdowns early on. Currently up to 12 touchdowns and 1,500 yards on the ground this year for James Cook. 2 more receiving touchdowns, 288 more receiving yards. We talked about regression as the conversation with him. There is a chance he exceeds everything from last year with James Cook.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was pretty early on. It was clear that those fading James Cook at his ADP were probably going to rue that decision. And, touchdown wise, he's going to have a chance, if he has 2 touchdowns each of the next 2 weeks to match the 16 from last season. But, like you said, he's already done more as a receiver. He is averaging significantly more rushing yardage per game. We're talking like 40 more rushing yards than he was a year ago. He's already got 500 plus more than he did last season in one fewer game. And he already has 80 more attempts. So we've seen even more of James Cook, despite them having two pretty reasonable backup options in Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. I did think we'd see a little more rotation. They were mixing in Ray Davis in the second half as they tried to salt this game away against Cleveland. But James Cook is far and away their best option. And, I think some of the logic all along was we think Buffalo's going to score a ton of points. They have a pretty favorable schedule, a pretty favorable division. It's not all going to be Josh Allen. The Bills' passing game has probably been worse than we expected, and that's led them to rely even more on James Cook. But, the fear of the touchdown regression, again, he might not get to 16, but we're probably looking at like 13 or 14 at the minimum. So that turned out to be, one of those things that I think we, as a fantasy community, kind of talked ourselves into more than anything else.
Yeah, getting him in the third round in a number of leagues was a gift, a real gift. Is he a first rounder next year?
He'll be in the conversation. I don't think he will go in the first round in most leagues because of the other names ahead of him. Like if McCaffrey's back in that mix, Gibbs is going to be a first rounder. I think JT is going to be a first rounder. Bijan's a first rounder. Achane is questionable. Like Achane versus Cook, I think is an interesting debate. It kind of depends how many receivers, I guess, you're pushing into round one. If we pencil in Nakua, JSN, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, then we're up to 10 players already. So he could sneak into that, 11 or 12 conversation, but I think he's kind of more of a wheel to early to mid second for me.
Yeah. I'm just thinking though, I mean, how many people have actually outproduced Cook? It's can't be more than a couple.
In terms of total fantasy production, McCaffrey, Gibbs, Taylor, Robinson, and Achane are all ahead of him.
Okay. There you go. So I think it's just, I think it's just really interesting to have that conversation that he doesn't get included in that grouping. Yeah. And there's some that are on the come that are getting more, but he leads everybody in rushing yards.
Right.
And we want more. We're like more.
Yeah. I think part of it is, the reputation of him versus those other guys coming into the season is part of it. Whether or not he's a first round guy, it's really going to come down to, are you taking James Cook or are you taking Nico Collins? Are you taking James Cook or are you taking Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb? He's absolutely in the conversation. I just don't think we're going to see him be a lock first rounder in every league by any means. Yeah.
Among fantasy running backs, I have it in standard. That's why I was like, wait, I thought there was more that outproduced him, but still, he's been fantastic. Only McCaffrey, Gibbs, Taylor, and Bijan and Achane. That's 6 really good running backs, though.
Yeah.
That just shows, hey, if you had 2 good running backs, you're doing great in the fantasy playoffs. So I think that is one of the other takeaways as far as we're going, as far as that goes here. Okay, before we talk about our next topic, quick note from our friends over at Dabble. We appreciate their sponsorship. Dabble isn't just another DFS app. It's the ultimate social platform where you can connect with other fantasy sports lovers. Dabble lets you win big. You can win up to 5,000 times your money this football season. Starting with Dabble is easy. New users get $25 free when signing up. No deposit necessary. Check out the link in the episode description below to download Dabble now. One of the games that I was looking forward to from a fantasy perspective was Atlanta and Arizona, and that was kind of low-key a disappointment. I expected a little bit more, not even low-key. It was a disappointment. I expected Arizona to do more offensively. I expected the total to get in the 50s, ended up being at 45, and it took a late Arizona field goal just to get to that. Arizona is who I'm most specifically disappointed with. Even with Marvin Harrison Jr. only playing 50% of the snaps, Michael Wilson got 3 targets. He got the early touchdown, and we're up to like 50 yards and a touchdown in the second quarter. I'm like, that's right. He's going to eat again. Atlanta stinks. They're going to throw the ball a bunch here. What happened in this game?
Yeah, this is one I was watching closely. I love the over 47.5. We were cruising early in the game, even with some long drives, some field goal settling. Only got 13 points in the second half, and that is due in large part to ball control by the Atlanta Falcons. Cardinals also missed 2 field goals, by the way, 2 very makeable field goals that would have either one of those would have pushed this game over. So it was just a brutal sweat if you did have the over there. But the Falcons' first 2 drives of the second half took up 14 minutes. They ended up dominating time of possession. They ran almost 20 more plays than Arizona. So ended up being a really disappointing game on the Arizona side of things. I mean, by far, Jacoby Brissett's fewest attempts in like 6 weeks, only threw it 31 times, barely got over 200 yards. Cardinals were moving the ball pretty effectively throughout the game. I think we only had 1 punt between the 2 teams, and that was Arizona early in the fourth quarter, but they would, continually get it into field goal range, couldn't quite push it into the red zone. Both times they got to the red zone, they didn't end up converting touchdowns. So it ended up being a big letdown game fantasy wise. Michael Carter, did end up being the main back as we expected. Did see more of DeMercado this week than we did in week 16. I don't really love either of these options. Arizona does have a very good matchup this week against Cincinnati. So, maybe you could fire up Michael Carter. But ultimately, I think Arizona is a team that usually abandons the run pretty early, and they do just want to throw it. You got bailed out with that Michael Wilson touchdown early in the game. Like you said, almost nothing from him the rest of the game. Trey McBride, 4 catches on 10 targets, 4 for 27. Marvin Harrison Jr. only played about 50% of snaps. He didn't look like himself, just 1 catch. Elijah Higgins ended up being the guy for Arizona, 7 catches on 8 targets.
Yeah, very disappointing game. I think it was just a bad Brissett game, and that
he was rough.
And that's just the point. I mean, he's been better than Kyler, but he's still not good. And I think sometimes we kind of think, oh yeah, well, hey, to be fair, Brissett's been amazing for us. Put up great numbers against Houston of all teams,
right?
And yet still lays this egg here. I don't think we had that question earlier about someone, debating Lawrence versus Brissett. I think Lawrence is just safer as a player than Brissett, even though Brissett's got the great matchup against the Bengals this week. Makes it tough. I'm still got to start Michael Wilson in one of my championship games this week. I'm going to do so, but I am a little concerned about Harrison being a little bit more up to speed. I'm just going to chalk up last week as just a bad game for Brissett and just hope I get my base of points there, because really I don't have it. I don't have an alternative. It's kind of talking about what's happened at the wide receiver position this year. After you get to like 20, it gets really rough in terms of like production from week to week. You get some outliers there, but there's a lot of players you just can't count on.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Khalil Shakir zone for me, where it's every week I'm like, yeah, maybe this is the Shakir week. Do I feel comfortable starting Devontae Smith? I've been going through that with Ibuka for
Zay
8 weeks in a row now.
Yeah.
I mean, Zay Flowers, who ended up fumbling the game away for Baltimore. Yeah, it does get rough. There is a clear line of demarcation. One last thing I'll say on this ongoing debate of Prescott versus Brissett versus Lawrence. If you are looking for a true tiebreaker, maybe it's just the rushing for Trevor Lawrence, which has been a big part of the package during this run for the Jags. Like, he's giving you like 30 rushing yards per game. He's got a couple rushing touchdowns in that span. And he's also not turning the ball over. I think that's kind of been the big thing with Lawrence, is we've seen stretches where he's looked like a productive quarterback, but for every good throw, he's given it back. I mean, I think over these last 4 games now, it's 14 touchdowns and no turnovers. I mean, that has been the one thing that has kind of stuck with Trevor Lawrence, even through the good stretches, is that the turnovers have always felt like they're right around the corner. And the fact that he's been able to eliminate those has just been huge.
I think the Jacoby Myers trade, and I've said this before, was transformative. It changed the Jaguars' offense. It gives Trevor someone he trusts. He makes those throws with more confidence now. I think that really is part of it there. They signed Myers to the long-term deal, or 3-year deal. They rewarded him. He got that contract extension he was wanting to get with the Raiders, couldn't get, and but for the grace of God go I, because he's much happier in Jacksonville there, and Lawrence is happier. It's sometimes the analysis can be basic. Sometimes we say, well, Thomas doesn't want to go over the middle and Myers will, and that's
exactly what's happening.
You're being too reductive.
That's really exactly what's happening.
It's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
All these in-breaking routes are now on the table, and it just makes this offense better. I think Thomas will have better games than he did last week. I think some of this was just against the Broncos, and everything else was working. Parker Washington was feasting on whoever the third corner was for, the slot corner for the Broncos. He was having himself a day, made some plays in the, after the catch too. Parker Washington has had a big part in this season for the Jaguars. Look at the Houston game. They don't win that game without Parker Washington. They don't win the San Francisco. Well, they win the San Francisco game without Parker Washington, but he was huge in that game too. And these are big wins.
Yeah, I mean, early in the season, it was more about his contributions on special teams.
Yeah,
and I think as Travis Hunter got hurt, as Brian Thomas was hurt and ineffective, they started to turn to Parker Washington just out of necessity in that wide receiver room. And now, Brian Thomas is not playing great, but he's playing better than he was early in the season. I think almost being now kind of the number 2 to Myers has been good for him. And, it's allowed Parker Washington to slide into the role that he should be in, which is a kind of high level number 3, as opposed to your number 1 or number 2 target, which he was at times this season. But, even with that role seemingly fluctuating week to week, I mean, he's had, I think it's 6 of his last 8 games. He's seen at least 7 targets. I mean, there is some viability here with Parker Washington. It was a career game against Denver. Like if you're excited to start him this week, I would temper expectations. We're probably not going to see something like that as I completely lose my voice. That's how excited I am about the Jags.
It's touching.
We're not going to see something like that again this week necessarily. Again, Jags threw it a ton. They should have better success on the ground against the Colts, but he's turned into, I think, a real option, a real keeper for the Jags. And with that extension going to Jacoby Myers, I do wonder, would they explore trying to offload Brian Thomas this summer, especially if they expect to get something big out of Travis Hunter at wide receiver next year?
I was just going to bring up Travis Hunter. It's funny though, because it could be the same sort of dynamic where that it's a botched trade. It doesn't work out. And yet the team is good enough to overcome that. Because clearly it did not work in year 1. It's going to be dicey in year 2. I hold on to Thomas if I'm Jacksonville, by the way. I think I think you hit the reset button with him, and you have all of a sudden you have Myers, Washington, and Thomas as your big 3. You have depth. I think that's great. And you just let Hunter play corner.
It depends to me what the price is, because they do need to recoup some draft capital, for the Travis Hunter trade, which does not look very good right now. But you'd be selling Brian Thomas at really low value. So it totally depends to me on, who's buying, what's the price. I'd be open to it. But we also have a fantastic rookie year out of Brian Thomas, right? It's not like he floundered as a rookie and took no steps forward as a sophomore. Like there is enough there. There's a large enough sample to suggest that this guy could be really good. So I would be hesitant to just fully give up on that.
And by the way, in dynasty leagues, I'm probably not giving up on Thomas either. I'm stubborn that way. I do have him in 2 dynasty leagues, so maybe I'm just projecting and hoping and crossing my fingers for the best, but I'm not giving up on him as well. We are brought to you by Prosper Trading. Every weekend, millions bet on sports, hoping to beat the odds. But here's the truth. The house always wins. With trading, you're not betting, you're building. At Prosper Trading Academy, we give you the tools, the education, and the live guidance to actually create an edge. You can control your risk, compound your wins, and trade alongside real pros every single day. Stop gambling on games you can't control. Start trading the markets you can. Visit prospertrading.com/ROTO today and take your shot at real financial growth. Thank you to Prosper Trading for us there. Nick, on the Broncos side of things there, RJ Harvey kind of combined with Bo Nix to lose a fumble. Ball security has been an issue for him. What's your concern with him long term?
Not overly concerned. I guess I was more concerned about his usage, when they had J.K. Dobbins healthy, and the fact that they chose to prioritize Dobbins over somebody that they, spent such high draft capital on. But we still saw him take the majority of the workload. They're mixing in Tyler Bidet. We saw some Jaleel McLaughlin, who had 5 carries in this game, but still 5 targets out of the backfield for Harvey. Broncos didn't have a ton of success on the ground. We're able to hit some big plays through the air, but a lot of those came later in the game when they were kind of trying to play catch up. And we've seen that from Denver, where they have these games where they struggle offensively. And then when they absolutely need to, all of a sudden they're hitting big plays. But it was too little, too late. I think they just ran into a really good defense, right? Like all the talk around the Jaguars is, this offense that's putting up points on everybody. They go into Denver and they score 34. Trevor Lawrence is playing at a high level. Liam Cohen has everybody on the same page. Like hidden in all this is like the one consistent unit from start to finish this season for the Jags has been that defense. We don't talk about them in the same light as Houston or Denver or the Rams, teams like that. The numbers say they're in that conversation.
Yeah. Weren't they like number 3 in EPA now?
Yeah, they're up to 3rd in EPA. They're basically top 10 in every advanced stat. And they have played a relatively easy schedule of opposing offenses. Like the Jones injury against the Colts, for instance, kind of skews that game. But no, they've been one of the best defenses in the NFL all year long, up to 3rd now in EPA per play. They are 10th in success rate, 4th in EPA per pass, and 10th in EPA per rush.
Indeed. Really legit. And they get the Colts with Phillip Rivers, and then they get Tennessee to finish too. So Jaguars defense might not be a bad play the next 2 weeks here, or at least this week. If you're in your fantasy championship, please tell me you don't have a week 18 fantasy championship. Talking about the Colts, we talked about the Colts a little bit in the Niners smidgen. We didn't really break down that game. We don't have to do that necessarily. I will say this: Brock Purdy going up against the Bears on Sunday night. Interesting matchup there. Purdy obviously has gotten you pretty far if you have him going into the fantasy championship game here. How confident are you starting him against the Bears?
Pretty confident. I think Brock Purdy has played 2 excellent games back to back. Colts defense was a big contributor to what we saw from Purdy last night, but he was still completely dialed in, made some really good throws, throwing guys open, fitting balls into tight windows. You think back to that game, what was it? I think it was the Carolina game, right? Where he had 3 consecutive interceptions, and you're just kind of wondering, like, man, he doesn't really look like himself. Really, since then, I think he's played great. And this Bears team, obviously they're coming off of what looks like a good defensive performance against Green Bay, but they played half of that game with a backup quarterback. It was cold. It was outdoors. Green Bay was routinely finding its way into the red zone and then finding ways not to score. I think San Francisco will be better in those areas. It's a game with a high total. I think both teams are going to be able to move the ball readily.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm looking forward to that. I do have in one league, well, in the NFFC, I have a Jalen Hurts versus Caleb Williams decision. It is pretty close. I mean, Philly at Buffalo. I have to check the weather as we get closer on this one here.
Yeah.
Weather might actually be an issue in San Francisco. We're going to get a atmospheric river this week in California in terms of rain, but I might be done by Sunday, but we'll see how the conditions are in Santa Clara. That actually might concern me just a little bit. We did see that. I think the wide receiver depth getting eviscerated for the Bears actually mattered in that game against the Packers. Zacchaeus just one of the all-time drops in that game, which I thought was going to be a killer for that team. Then they got the 3rd and 20 penalty in their favor, so they could get that field goal, keep the game alive. But point is, they missed Odunze. They missed having a Burden out there as well. I don't trust Zacchaeus, and DJ Moore is great, but he's not a guy that's getting tons of separation.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't need much on that last throw from Caleb Williams, which was one of the dimes of the year. And then, of course, you got Ja'Day Walker coming up, just a totally unknown guy, not even wearing a wide receiver number, who catches the game tying touchdown in regulation on that broken coverage. I do think there's a decent chance they could get Burden back this week, which would be big. Perhaps no George Kittle on the San Francisco side of things. That's a little worrisome, but I think that means more for Juwan Jennings. If you're firing up him this week, he's been great for them down the stretch. I think that's going to be a really fun game and a very meaningful game, by the way. Yes. San Francisco is still very much alive for the 1 seed. Chicago's got to hold off Green Bay. If the Bears lose out and the Packers win out, all of a sudden Packers usurp them again in the NFC North. So I think it's a good spot for Caleb. I think it's a good spot for Brock Purdy. I think I might go Hurts over Purdy, though, because of the rushing potential against that Bills defense.
Yeah, and I'm going to go Hurts over Williams as well. I think, it's hard not to go with Hurts. Even he's had a couple of, that the Monday night game against the Chargers was damaging. It could have been second in my league instead of third. I would have made some more money just for that one decision. But you could do that every game every week there too, because I've missed out by 2 total points. So fun times there. But there's too many games where he's had that upside, including last week. They kind of put that game in the cooler a little early in the second half. That was frustrating a little bit there, seeing like Bigsby score and not anybody I needed, but still, the
Eagles are just happy to not be fighting for their lives on the final possession.
Yeah, that's true. And thing is, they've clinched their division. They're kind of a weird spot with. Are they playing for seeding? What are they going to be playing for? That's the other thing to watch for a little bit there too. Should be interesting. All right, Nick, time to open up your notebook for other fantasy notes. I'm gonna queue up a couple of guys. Houston, Las Vegas. I want to start with, oddly enough, the running backs in this game. Jawhar Jordan for the Houston Texans and Ashton Jeanty. After you've been eliminated from your fantasy playoffs, he goes off against one of the best defenses in the league. What happened?
I think just a classic overlooking spot by Houston. Seeing what happened to the Raiders last week. Seeing what Seattle did to Max Brosmer. I kind of felt like it was going to be one of those games, and it almost was early on because, Geno Smith throws a pick 6 on the Raiders' first or second possession of the game, and you're like, all right, here we go. But CJ Stroud was just very bad in this game. Raiders defense actually played extremely well. I thought it wasn't just Stroud missing receivers. They made life tough on Houston, really missed Woody Marks. I think Jawhar Jordan is certainly somebody to look into in the event that Marks doesn't return this week. I think he does, though. Sounded like he could have played in the Vegas game if they absolutely needed him to, and this is meaningful for Houston. So I think we see Marks out there, but Jordan ended up being the leader in carries, the leader in targets, the leader in snaps, routes, everything for Texans running backs. So they seem to like him over Nick Chubb and Dare Ogunbowale. But yeah, Jeanty was kind of the story fantasy-wise from this game. There wasn't a whole lot else. 24 for 128 and a 51-yard touchdown, had a 60-yard receiving touchdown where he's just shaking defenders off, never really broke stride. So those two big plays, accounted for almost all of his production, but that's what you want to see more of, right? Like those are, the volume has been there all year. The efficiency has not, and really the big plays haven't, but to come out and have this game against Houston, I don't think I heard one person talking about this being an Ashton Jeanty spot in week 16.
No, I did not. And in fact, I had him ranked in my 30s. Shame on me for not seeing that upside. But it does kind of like lift the lid on his 2026 prospects. It's one of those like, oh yeah, don't forget about Ashton Jeanty. He can still play. Might have gotten him chance. We had a whole offseason talking cycle to change this, but we could have had an instance there where you got some discounts on him. Now, what are you looking at? Like early third round for Jeanty, fourth round? I think third round probably.
I think so. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, which is that this game, and we'll see what he does over the final 2 weeks. Like especially if he has another big game at some point, and he could do that this week against the Giants. I mean, just an all-time matchup, Raiders Giants this week.
Yes.
Like if he has another big game, I think that might carry him. That might give him some momentum. There will be, I'm sure, some degree of renewed Raiders optimism in the offseason. Like there are still Jeanty believers. You see this in every fantasy sport, but it's like there are still the Zion Williamson believers and the John Morant believers in fantasy basketball. This is a different situation, of course. It's more about the team around him than the player. But when somebody comes in with that level of hype that Jeanty brought into his rookie year, that usually sticks with a guy for multiple years.
For sure there. So it would have been and you probably wouldn't have gotten that much of a discount. You're probably right about that. Okay, let's roll on here because there's so many more things to cover because everybody went off. Bengals. I'm a Bengals fan. It was frustrating to see. It was fun to see the Bengals play well and just have fun out there. It was also very frustrating too because you think about what might have been.
Yeah, this was kind of a reminder of what the Bengals offense was supposed to look like this season. Very quiet first half for Chase Brown, and then a monster second half. Ended up being pulled late in the game because the Bengals broke this open, but finished 12 for 66 on the ground with a touchdown, 4 for 43, and 2 touchdowns through the air. I actually thought Quinn Ewers looked okay for Miami. Both interceptions were really nice plays. The type of plays we have not seen very often from the Cincinnati Bengals defense this season. And it was a back and forth game through most of the first half. Miami was up 14-10. And then after that went 3 and out, fumble, interception, out on downs, interception, 3 and out. I believe they turned it over in some form or fashion on all of their drives in the third quarter. So this very quickly went from back and forth, who's going to score last, to Miami turning the ball over, Cincinnati immediately cashing those into touchdowns. Bengals scored on 6 straight possessions, and this game went from really fun, really competitive to over in about 20 minutes.
Yep, that was a fun third quarter. Definitely a fun third quarter for the Bengals. Yeah, and the way they closed out at the end of the second quarter too. Not much else to say. You're starting Burrow, Chase, Higgins, Brown this week against Arizona. You're starting Achane. Achane is still awesome. Had one big play overturned by a penalty, and then they fumbled the next play. Dolce had his fumble after that. They're big inflection point in that game a little bit there. Not much else to say there as far as that goes. KC, Tennessee, do we have to? No.
Excuse me. No, I have almost nothing to say here. Cam Ward was really good. Tony Pollard, third straight 100-yard game. KC had 133 yards of offense. Obviously Gardner Minshew went out early. He was bad before that, 3 for 8 for 15 yards. Chris Olajuwon, provides some mobility, I guess, for the Chiefs at quarterback. I didn't really love what I saw on the KC side in any way. They can't run the ball. Patrick Mahomes was kind of holding this offense together. And lo and behold, when you take him out of the mix, it looks even worse. So I have very, very low expectations for KC over these last 2 games.
Same here. New Orleans Jets, Chris Olave is excellent. The Jets are not excellent. Their defense is hideous. They play the Pats this week. I'm watching Travion Henderson's status carefully because I have both him and Stevenson. I just want clarity. That's all I want. And I just want to be able to start guys against the Jets and know that they'll be out there.
Yeah, I think if Henderson is out, which I expect him to be, I think Stevenson becomes not a must start, but a very appealing start.
I think he's a must start.
Jets defense is terrible. It is worth noting that this was a 1-score game. It was 9-6 until the final minute of the third quarter, and then New Orleans outscored the Jets 20-0 in like the final 15-40 of game time. So I wouldn't say the Jets defense, put on a show by any means. It's a pretty limited skill group for New Orleans. It's kind of Chris Olave and everybody else. They don't really even try to run the ball anymore with Audric Estime. But it was a quiet 300-yard day for Tyler Shuck, who continues to look good.
What are your thoughts on Shuck for next year?
I'm interested. I still would be skeptical to just lock him in and say, all right, we have a quarterback, but he's passing the eye test. He looks like an NFL quarterback. He doesn't look like one of these backups that we have so many of right now around the league. And if you can get him better weapons, I think you could sell me on another year of Tyler Shuck. I mean, New Orleans has kind of played themselves out of contention for the number one pick. Not that we have a Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck type of prospect at the top of the draft that you're specifically concerned about drafting. So like they could still be in the mix to take a quarterback, but I think you feel pretty good if you're New Orleans. And, I continue to be impressed by this defense, which all year has been able to keep them in games.
If you have George Kittle and who are you picking up as insurance in case he can't play on Sunday night?
Man, that is a good question. I feel like you're bringing this up when we're talking about the Saints because Taysom Hill could be an option. And look, I don't discourage you from rolling the dice on Taysom Hill in what could be like the second to last game of his career. But I'm looking at one of my 12-team ESPN leagues, and the tight ends that are available there should be a pretty representative sample. Brenton Strange still available in about 73% of leagues. Colby Parkinson, Darren Waller are out there in about 70% of ESPN leagues. You could look at AJ Barner, with Metcalf out, maybe Pat Freiermuth becomes a little more appealing. I would prioritize Parkinson, Strange, maybe Waller, maybe not Waller. Parkinson and Strange for sure over Taysom Hill.
Me too.
I think both have pretty solid matchups. No Devontae Adams likely again this week. So you probably don't need to dip into Taysom Hill territory, but it's defensible. It's defensible. I think the running back injuries have kind of boosted his stock. There is a chance, by the way, Kamara could return this week. Hasn't really been any word on him since he went out.
Yeah. I'd be stunned if he comes back this year, but you never know. You just really never know there. All right. Anything else to empty the notebook before we get on out of here?
The one game we didn't really hit, I guess, is Chargers-Cowboys, which was a great offensive game. I mean, Justin Herbert was incredible. Chargers scored on 5 of their first 6 drives. Herbert had 300 yards on just 23 completions, spreading it around. Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, Trey Harris, Will Dissly even got in on the action. It was just a very equitable day for that Chargers offense. We kind of wrote off the Chargers when Slater went down, when Joe Alt went down. I think they've quietly played as well as anybody over the last month. They got wins over Vegas, Philly, KC, Dallas. All of those games, looked like kind of daunting spots for them. And every single game that defense has showed up, they've outplayed their opponents on offense. They get the Texans at home this week, then at the Broncos in week 18. So 2 more really, really tough tests to finish out this season for the Chargers. But, I think without those tackles, it still feels like there might be a ceiling on this team. They probably deserve a little bit more respect. I mean, they've amassed a pretty nice resume and have a chance to add to it.
I think these last 2 games will be a lot like that Philly Monday night game. A lot of hitting on both sides of for both teams. A lot of good defenses going on and some shakiness on the offensive side of the ball there for both teams. So we'll see. But Herbert played awesome against the Cowboys.
Great.
He can rise above some of the circumstances. I think he'll ultimately run into some defenses or just a team that'll score enough points that it won't be enough for Herbert. But man, maybe we should be giving the Chargers more credit and Jalen Hurts maybe a little less criticism. Maybe not. I don't know.
Maybe the defense is playing really well. I mean, they caught the Eagles at the right time. They caught the Chiefs at the right time. We can acknowledge that. But I think they're live. I think they're live in the AFC. One final note, by the way, that I will leave us on. This is not fantasy related. I guess it's defense special teams related. Are you aware, Jeff, that the New York Jets are on the brink of history?
Yes.
No team has ever gone a full year without an interception. They're 2 games away from doing it.
We can do it. I think they had one overturned at one point earlier this year, and that's about as close as they've come. So yeah, just you hire a defensive-minded head coach, and that's what you get too.
Every other team has at least 6 interceptions. Every other team.
It's just one of those oddities. You got to like back into one every once in a while. Just
you would think.
Really awful DB play and awful pass rush has a lot to do with that too. It has to be. So, all right. I think we'll close on that note. Good luck in your championship games. We'll be back to recap them next week. But go take home your ship. We want to hear from you. Let us know how you did. And of course, the value meter will be up there. We'll have tools to help you win your league throughout the week. Thanks for tuning in to RotoWire. Take care.